breath. "Be my husband," the Apache woman pleaded with the feared rancher behind bars. The sun hung low over the dusty plains, casting long shadows across the sparse settlements that clung to the edges of the Arizona desert. Maria walked carefully along the narrow path that led to the small town near the border. Her moccasins made soft prints in the sand, and her eyes, dark and alert, scanned the horizon constantly. She had grown up on the outskirts of white settlements, learning early to be cautious of ranchers, soldiers, and strangers. The world she lived in was harsh, full of dangers, but it had also taught her strength and patience. Maria belonged to the Apache people, a proud and resilient community that had survived centuries of hardship. Her family lived in a small encampment beyond the edge of town, and she spent her days helping care for the children, gathering water, and learning the old ways of her people. Yet even with this life, she felt the pull of curiosity, a feeling she had tried to ignore for months. Something about the world of the settlers intrigued her, especially the man who had become the center of every whispered conversation in town. John Black Jack Callahan's name was on everyone's lips. The stories about him traveled faster than the wind. He was a rancher, they said, with a temper as hot as the summer sun and a hand as quick as lightning. People described him with awe and fear. He had fought duels, run off thieves, and punished anyone who dared threaten his land. Some said he had killed men without a second thought. Others claimed he was honorable when the situation demanded it, but few had seen that side of him. Children crossed the street when he passed, and adults whispered behind closed doors. Maria had heard these stories many times. When she was younger, she would have avoided him without a second thought. But lately, something had changed. She noticed the quiet moments when he rode through the desert alone, the way he helped a struggling calf to its feet, or how he sometimes paused and looked out over the land with a distant expression. There was more to him than the fearsome reputation, she thought. There had to be. Then came the news that shook the town. John had been arrested. The sheriff's office was filled with murmurs, and townspeople crowded near the wooden building to catch a glimpse of the man they had feared for years. Maria stayed at a distance, watching quietly. John sat behind bars, his face expressionless, though his eyes burned with a quiet fire. The rumors said he had been involved in a murder during a land dispute, but the truth was often obscured by gossip. What mattered now was that he was vulnerable, and the town could not stop talking about what might happen to him. Maria's curiosity grew into a strange feeling she could not explain. It was not fear, though she respected the danger he represented. It was not admiration, though she recognized his strength. It was something else, a pull toward understanding, a desire to see the man behind the reputation. She had watched him for months, seen the brief flashes of humanity beneath his rough exterior, and now the opportunity to speak with him had presented itself. The path to the sheriff's office was quiet as she approached. Dust swirled around her feet with every step, and the afternoon sun beat down on her shoulders. She could hear the distant sounds of the town, the clatter of hooves, the murmur of voices, the occasional shout from children playing near the market. Her heart beat faster, not from fear but from anticipation. She had decided she would speak to him, despite what others might think, despite the danger. When Maria entered the small jailhouse, the air inside was heavy with the smell of dust and wood. The room was simple, a wooden counter, a few benches, and a single cell where John sat. He was taller than she expected, broad-shouldered, with a rugged face marked by years of sun and wind. His dark hair was slightly unkempt, and his eyes, sharp and calculating, followed her every move. For a moment, neither spoke. Maria stepped closer, careful to show no sign of weakness. She had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. John's gaze softened slightly as he took in her calm presence. most people would have been trembling, cursing, or trying to charm him. Maria showed none of those things. "I am Maria," she said finally, her voice steady. "I came to speak with you." John raised an eyebrow, a small smirk forming on his face. "Speak? And why would I listen to you, little Apache girl?" His tone was not cruel, but it carried the weight of someone used to being obeyed or ignored. "I have something important to say," Maria replied. She did not flinch. "It is about your future." He studied her for a long moment. There was a tension in the air, a silent acknowledgement that what she said mattered, even if he was unsure why. Maria took a deep breath and began to explain. She spoke of her people, of the dangers they faced, and the need for allies in a world that often seemed hostile. She spoke honestly, without exaggeration or flattery. She told him that she saw something in him. Strength, yes, but also a capacity for honor and care that others overlooked. John listened quietly. His expression did not change much, but his eyes softened ever so slightly. He had faced threats, betrayals, and hardships, yet here was someone speaking to him not with fear or greed, but with truth. Maria's words struck a chord in a place he had long forgotten existed. The part of him that remembered hope, connection, and trust. "You speak boldly," he said at last. "Most people wouldn't dare say a word in this room without trembling. Why do you?" Maria smiled faintly. "Because the truth matters more than fear, and because sometimes we must take risks to protect what we care about." For a long while, neither spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was a shared understanding. Maria saw the man beyond the legend, and John, perhaps for the first time in years, saw the woman who spoke to him without flattery, threat, or demand. There was a quiet recognition of strength on both sides. Outside, the town continued to buzz with gossip and speculation. People passed by the jailhouse, unaware of the conversation unfolding within. Maria and John existed in their own space, where stories and reputations faded, leaving only two human beings trying to understand each other. Finally, Maria spoke again. "I want to help you, but I need you to listen, not because you must, but because you want to." "Can you do that?" John studied her for a moment, weighing his pride against the sincerity in her eyes. Slowly, he nodded. "I can listen," he said quietly. "I can do that. It was a small victory, but it mattered." The first steps toward trust had been taken, and as Maria turned to leave, she felt a strange mix of hope and fear. The journey ahead would be difficult. There were dangers in the world, misunderstandings and enemies, both known and hidden. But for the first time, she felt a connection that was real, one that could not be broken by fear alone. Outside, the sun dipped lower, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and red. Maria walked back along the dusty path to her camp, her mind alive with possibilities. She had taken a bold step, one that could change both their lives forever. And somewhere behind the wooden bars of the jail, John Callahan thought of her words, and for the first time in years, wondered if a different life was possible. The story of a feared rancher and an Apache woman had begun, not with confrontation or battle, but with courage, honesty, and the quiet understanding that sometimes the hardest choices were made in moments of silence. Maria returned to the small jailhouse the next morning. The desert was quiet, the sun rising slowly, casting a soft golden light over the dusty town. She had spent the night thinking about her visit, planning carefully what she would say. Her heart pounded as she approached the wooden building, but this time It was not just curiosity driving her. It was determination. Desperation. She had made a choice, and there was no turning back. The town was still stirring awake when she entered. The air smelled faintly of smoke and baked earth. Inside, the silence was heavy, broken only by the creak of the wooden floor under her feet. John Callahan sat behind the bars, his broad shoulders relaxed, though his eyes were alert. He had not expected her to return so soon, and a flicker of surprise crossed his face. "You're back," he said, his voice low but not unkind. "Most people would not dare step inside twice." "I had to come," Maria replied. She kept her voice steady, but inside her nerves buzzed like the wind through the desert grass. "There is something I need to ask you." Something important. John studied her for a long moment, leaning against the wooden wall of the cell. "And what is that?" he asked finally. There was a faint smirk on his lips, though it did not reach the seriousness in his eyes. Maria took a deep breath. This was the moment she had been preparing for. She had never spoken like this to anyone, especially not someone with John's reputation. "I want you to consider marrying me," she said simply. Desperation. The words hung in the air, heavy and unexpected. John's eyes widened slightly, and for a moment he seemed unsure whether to laugh or growl. "Marry you?" he repeated, his voice rough with disbelief. "Do you understand who I am?" "I understand," Maria said firmly. "I know you are feared. I know the things people say about you. But I also know that behind those stories is a man who is strong, who can protect what he cares about, and who can make a difference. I see that man, John, not the one the town whispers about, but the one who is here, in this cell, with me speaking honestly." John leaned back against the wall, crossing his arms. His expression was guarded, but something softened in his eyes. He had faced many challenges in his life. Battles, betrayals, hardships, but no one had ever spoken to him with such calm determination. Most people came with fear, anger, or deceit. Maria's words were different. They were true. "Rain, you are bold. I will give you that," he said slowly. "Most women, or men, would not say such a thing to me." They would either run or argue. "Why do you speak so freely?" Maria met his gaze steadily. "Because I am not afraid. Because I have lived with fear all my life, and I know that courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is doing what is right, even when you are afraid. I have thought about this for many nights. I know what I am asking is dangerous. But it is also honest. I want a future where my people can be safe, where I can help you, and where we can face the world together." John was quiet for a moment. The silence between them was filled with something neither had expected: respect. There was a weight to her words, a sincerity that could not be ignored. He had always believed that people only came to him for his strength, his money, or his land. No one had ever come for him alone.
You speak as though you know me," he said finally, his voice quieter, almost vulnerable.
"Do you know what people think of me? Do you know the danger that comes with my name?" "I know," Maria said without hesitation.
"I know what people say, and I know what is true. You are strong, yes, but you are also alone. And sometimes being alone makes people afraid of their own hearts." "I see that, John. I see that you are more than the stories. You are capable of kindness, loyalty, and courage in ways most people do not understand." He shook his head slightly, a mixture of amusement and disbelief crossing his face. "You are speaking like someone who has thought too much," he said. "Most people think of survival, not of hope." "Hope is what makes us human," Maria said softly. "Without it, we are only shadows moving through life without purpose. I want more than survival, John. I want a life where I can care for my people and for someone I trust. I want that life with you." For the first time, John looked at her differently. He studied her face, noting the determination, the quiet strength, and the courage that radiated from her every word. She was not afraid of him, nor was she trying to control him. She was offering something rare, a choice, a partnership, and trust. "I won't lie," he said slowly. "I have lived a hard life. People fear me for a reason. I have made mistakes, and I have done things I am not proud of."
Why would you want to be with someone like me? Maria smiled faintly, a warmth in her eyes. "Because I see the man you can be, not the man people say you are. Everyone has shadows, John."
Everyone has regrets. But it is the choices we make now that define us. I choose to believe in you, even if it is only a small step. I choose to take a risk because it is worth it. The wind rattled the wooden bars of the cell as silence settled over them again. John's mind raced. He had faced countless dangers, gunfights, cattle rustlers, harsh winters, and the unforgiving desert, but nothing had tested him like this moment. This was not a battle of strength, but of trust and courage, and for the first time he felt uncertain, not because he feared danger, but because he felt something he had not felt in years: connection. "Marriage is a serious thing," he said finally, his voice low. "It is not something I have ever considered. I have always thought of it as a weakness, a tie that could hold me down, but desperate. And yet," he paused, searching for words, "and yet there is something in your eyes, something in your words that I cannot ignore." "You speak as if you believe in me even when I do not." "I do," Maria said simply. "I believe that people can change." "I believe that we can face the world together. I believe that courage is not just in fighting, but in choosing to trust someone, even when it is difficult. That is the courage I see in you, John." He was silent for a long time, his eyes studying her face, searching for signs of doubt, deceit, or fear. Round. There was none. She was steady, unwavering, and genuine. The walls he had built around himself began to feel thinner, not because he was weak, but because her words had touched something deep within him, something he had forgotten existed. Finally, he leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. "I do not know what to say," he admitted. "I have lived by fear and by force for so long that I am not sure I remember what trust feels like. But you make me wonder if there is another way. You make me wonder if someone could see me and not be afraid." Maria nodded gently. "That is all I ask. Just see me." "Bro, just consider what is possible. We do not have to have all the answers now. Brave. We only need to be honest with each other and brave enough to take the first step."
He looked away for a moment, thinking.
The creak. The jailhouse was quiet except for the creak of the floorboards and the faint wind outside. Then, slowly, he looked back at her, his expression unreadable. "I will consider it," he said quietly.
"Not because I know the outcome, but because I trust you enough to listen." A small smile appeared on Maria's face, a mixture of relief and hope. It was not a complete victory, but it was a beginning.
Brass. She had taken a risk, spoken her truth, and reached him in a way few others ever could. The first step towards something extraordinary had been taken. As Maria left the jailhouse, the sun climbed higher in the sky, warming the dusty streets. She felt a mixture of pride, hope, and nervous anticipation. The days ahead would be difficult, filled with questions, obstacles, and the scrutiny of the town. But for the first time, she felt a connection that was real, a bridge forming between two people from very different worlds. John remained in the cell, staring at the empty space where she had stood. He could not stop thinking about her words, her courage, and the unusual way she had looked at him, not with fear or awe, but with understanding. For the first time in a long while, he wondered what life could be like, beyond reputation, beyond fear, beyond solitude. And in that moment, both of them understood something important. Sometimes the bravest act is not a battle with enemies, but a battle with the heart, a decision to trust and to believe in something more than what is known. The morning air was crisp as Maria approached the jailhouse again. The desert had a quiet beauty at this hour, the sun casting soft pink and gold across the distant hills. The town was slowly coming to life, with the clatter of horses and the distant voices of people starting their day. Maria's heart beat steadily, not from fear, but from the anticipation of another conversation that could change the course of both their lives. Inside, John sat in the small cell, leaning against the wall. His eyes followed her as she entered, and for the first time there was no surprise, no smirk, only an understanding that she would return, no matter what others thought. He had been thinking about her words all night, replaying every sentence, every pause, every glance. The courage in her voice had left an impression on him that he could not ignore.
"Good morning, Maria," said softly, stepping closer.
"I hope I am not disturbing you." John shook his head.
You are not.
In fact, I have been waiting to see you again. Yesterday you said things I have not heard in a long time. I have been thinking about them, Maria smiled gently. That is why I came back. I think it is important for us to know each other more, to understand each other's pasts, so we can see what lies ahead. Rasp. John studied her for a moment, then nodded. Very well. You speak of honesty, so I will give you the same. Maria sat on the small bench outside the cell, her hands folded in her lap. I will start with myself, she said. I want you to understand why I am here and why I am asking this of you. She told him about her childhood, growing up in the Apache community. She spoke of her parents, her siblings, and the responsibilities she had carried from a young age. Life had been difficult. Food was sometimes scarce, and the dangers from outsiders were constant. She had learned to be alert, to move quietly to protect those she loved. But in all the hardship, she had also learned courage, compassion, and the value of trust. My people have always struggled to survive in a world that does not understand us, Maria said. We have lost family, homes, and friends, but we also have strength, and we hold on to hope. That hope keeps us alive and keeps us moving forward. John listened quietly, his expression thoughtful. First, he had always known the hardships of life, but hearing them from someone else's perspective, someone who faced danger not with weapons but with wisdom and care, was something new. He realized that Maria's strength was not born from fear or anger, but from a deep understanding of responsibility and love. And you? Maria asked gently. Breaths. Tell me about yourself. Tell me why you are here, behind these bars. John hesitated, as if the words were heavy on his tongue. Then, slowly, he began to speak. He told her about his childhood, growing up on a rough ranch with little guidance. He had learned early that strength and toughness were necessary to survive. He spoke of the fights he had faced, the enemies he had made and the mistakes he had regretted. Breaths rasp. Life had been harsh, and he had learned to trust few people. "I became who I am because I had to," he said quietly. "People feared me, and sometimes I used that fear to protect myself. But in doing so, I built walls around myself that I did not know how to remove." Breaths. "I thought that being strong meant being alone. I was wrong." Narration. Maria nodded, listening closely. "I understand," she said. "We both have had to survive in difficult worlds, and in surviving we sometimes forget the importance of connection, of trust, of letting someone in." John looked at her, seeing in her eyes the same kind of resilience he recognized in himself. For the first time in many years he felt that someone truly understood him. Not the man people feared, but the man he really was. It was a strange and powerful feeling, one that made him feel both vulnerable and alive. "I have made many mistakes," John continued, his voice low. "I have hurt people, and I have lost people. But I have also done things I am proud of. I have protected those who could not protect themselves. I have fought for what I believed was right." "Still, the weight of the past is heavy, and I do not know if I am worthy of the hope you offer." Maria shook her head gently. "It is not about worthiness," she said. "It is about choice. We cannot change the past, but we can choose what we do now. We can choose courage over fear, trust over doubt, and connection over isolation. That is why I am here. I believe in the choices we can make today." John's eyes softened. He felt a warmth that he had not felt in years, a sense of understanding and acceptance. Maria was not asking him to be perfect, nor was she judging him for his past. She was offering him the chance to be seen and to choose something better. "Tell me more about your people," John said, his curiosity growing. "What is life like for you outside of this town, beyond the fences and the dust?" Maria smiled. "Brett, it is not easy, but it is full of life. We care for each other. We share what we have, and we protect one another. There is joy in simple things. A child's laughter, a song by the fire, the beauty of the land around us. It is a life of balance. We know hardship, but we also know hope. That is why I want to bring our worlds together, not to change who we are, but to help each other survive and grow." John listened intently, imagining a life he had never known, one not ruled by fear, suspicion, and solitude. He imagined the quiet strength of Maria's people, their resilience, and their sense of community. It was a world he wanted to understand, a life he wanted to be part of. "Your words, they make me think," he said quietly. "I have lived so long in fear of what others think, in fear of losing control. But perhaps there is more to life than power and reputation. Perhaps there is trust, and perhaps there is connection." Maria reached out and placed a hand lightly on the bars, close to his. "There is, John. But it begins with honesty and courage. We have both shown that already by speaking the truth of our lives. Now we must decide how to move forward." For a long moment they sat in silence. The only sounds were the faint creak of the wooden floorboards and the distant calls of town life outside. In that quiet, they both realized something important. Understanding each other's past had not only revealed their vulnerabilities, but also their strengths. They were not perfect, but they were capable of growth, courage, and care. John finally spoke, his voice steady. "I never thought I would meet someone who could see me in this way, someone who would not judge me for my past." "You have done that, Maria, and for that, I am grateful. I am not sure where this will lead, but I am willing to see it through." Maria smiled, a warmth spreading across her face. "That is all I ask. We take it one step at a time. We do not need to have all the answers now. But we can face the future together, with honesty and courage." John nodded, feeling a sense of calm he had not known in years. The walls he had built around himself were still there, but they felt less like barriers and more like protection that could be adjusted, softened, and shared. He realized that trust and connection were not weaknesses, but a form of strength he had never allowed himself to experience. "You have taught me something important," he said quietly. "That strength is not just in fighting or surviving. It is in understanding, in caring, and in choosing to be brave with someone else. I will remember that." Maria rose to leave, but before she did, she looked at him one last time. "Breaths. We both have long paths ahead," she said gently. "But for now, we have honesty. And that is the beginning of everything."
As she stepped out into the morning sunlight, Maria felt a sense of hope she had not felt before. The past had shaped them both, but it did not define their future.
There was a possibility now, a possibility for trust, connection, and a shared life. John remained behind the bars, thinking of her words, her courage, and the unusual way she had reached him. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a life beyond fear, beyond reputation, and beyond solitude, a life where someone could see him for who he truly was. Desk, and in that quiet, both of them understood a truth that would guide their next steps. Understanding the past was not about blame or regret. It was about learning, growing, and finding the courage to face the future together. The morning sun had barely begun to rise when Maria made her way to the jailhouse again. The air was cooler than usual, carrying the scent of desert sage and dust. Her steps were quiet but determined. Today she would not simply speak with John. She would offer a plan that was bold, risky, and necessary. She knew it could change both their lives forever. Inside the small jailhouse, John sat quietly, staring at the floor. He had been thinking about Maria's words for days. Her courage, her honesty, and her unwavering belief in him had unsettled him in ways he did not expect. He was a man used to control, to fear, to careful calculations. Yet with Maria, none of those defenses felt right. She made him feel something he had not felt in years. Possibility. Maria approached the bars, her eyes steady. "John," she said softly, "I have been thinking. There is a way we can face what is coming, and perhaps even change what happens to you. But it will require courage, more than we have shown so far." John looked up, his expression wary. "Breath. And what is this plan?" he asked, though a part of him already sensed what she might say.
He had come to trust her judgment, even if it unsettled him.
Maria took a deep breath. "I want us to work together. If you agree to marry me, I can speak with my people and the town leaders. They respect me and my family, and I believe I can help sway opinion in your favor. It may not make everything easy, but it can give you support during the trial and beyond." John blinked, surprised by the boldness of her suggestion. "You want me to marry you? To influence the town?" he repeated. That is a dangerous thing to ask. And for what? Reputation? Protection? Maria shook her head. Not for reputation or protection, John. For trust. For connection. For a chance to show the town that there is more to you than fear. I believe people can be persuaded when they see honesty and courage. You have both, and I have a voice in my community. Together, we can stand stronger than we could alone. John ran a hand over his face, considering her words. He had faced many battles, some against men, some against nature, some against circumstances he could not control, but none had required the kind of courage Maria was asking for. Breath. To step into a public alliance, to let others see him as more than a feared rancher. It was terrifying, and yet it felt right. And what if it fails? He asked quietly, his voice low with concern. What if my enemies use this to laugh at me or strike when I am weakest? Maria's eyes were steady. Breath. Then we face it together. But what if it succeeds? What if we can create a future that is safer for both your people and mine? What if we can show that strength does not have to come from fear alone? John sighed, leaning back against the wall. The jailhouse felt smaller than usual, the walls closing in with the weight of the decision he had to make. He had spent years relying on force and reputation to survive, but those methods had left him isolated. Maria offered something different. Partnership, hope, and trust. I do not know if I am ready for that, he admitted finally. I have lived my life avoiding ties, avoiding responsibility to anyone but myself. And now you ask me to take a step into the unknown, to put faith in you, in something bigger than myself. Maria nodded. Breath. I understand. I am asking for a lot. But the fact that you are considering it shows courage. You do not have to make the decision right this moment. But think about what it could mean, not just for you, but for us, and for the people who depend on our choices. John sat in silence, letting her words sink in. The town would talk, the sheriff would watch, and the trial loomed like a dark cloud over everything. Yet in that moment he realized that the fear of judgment, of failure, was less frightening than the thought of continuing life alone, without trust, without connection. Tell me, he said at last, how do you propose we do this? How do you plan to persuade people who have only known me as a man to fear? First, we show honesty. We meet the people who have influence in the town, and we speak openly. Bang. I will not lie for you, and you will not pretend to be someone you are not. But we will show them that you have changed, that you are capable of courage, and that you can protect more than just yourself. Second, we involve my community. They respect me, and they will support what is fair and just. If we work together, we can create an impression of unity and trust that no one can ignore. John considered this. It was risky, yes. There were enemies and skeptics, people who would see this as weakness, but it was also an opportunity, perhaps the only one he had ever been offered, to change not only the town's perception of him, but also his own life. Very well, he said slowly, a sense of resolve settling over him. I will consider this marriage of trust. Not because I fully understand it, but because I trust you enough to believe that it might work. But understand this, Maria. If we fail, the consequences could be severe. We must be prepared for that. Maria smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and determination in her eyes. I know, John, and I am ready for whatever comes. Breath. Because I believe in you, and I believe in us. They sat in quiet understanding for a few moments. Outside, the town stirred with the normal life of a desert settlement, unaware of the plans being formed within the jailhouse. There was courage in that silence, a quiet strength that neither had expected, but both had come to rely upon. John broke the silence. Breath. I have lived my life thinking I had to face every danger alone. I have fought men, storms, and fate itself. But with you, it feels different. You make me want to face the unknown in a different way. Not with fear, but with hope. I cannot promise that I will succeed, but I can promise that I will try if you are with me. Maria reached out, her hand resting lightly on the cold metal bars between them. That is all I ask, John, that we try. Together. For a long moment they remained like that, two souls separated by bars but connected by understanding and a shared purpose. Both knew the road ahead would be difficult. There would be opposition from townspeople, questions from authorities, and threats from those who had always sought to undermine John's reputation. Yet the connection they had built, the trust and courage between them, was a powerful force neither had anticipated.
Outside, a few townsfolk paused near the jailhouse, curious of the quiet voices inside.
But no one entered. This conversation was private, sacred, and necessary. Round. In that small room, a plan was taking shape. Not just a plan for survival, but a plan for trust, unity, and perhaps even a future filled with possibility. John finally stood, brushing the dust from his coat. He looked at Maria with a seriousness that carried more weight than his usual stern expression. We will need to act carefully. Timing is crucial. One wrong move, and the whole town will turn against us. But I see now that hiding in fear achieves nothing. It is time to take a step forward, even if it is risky. Maria nodded. We will face it together.
I will guide what I can, and you will act with your strength and wisdom. That is all we need for now.
Step by step we will move forward. The rest of the morning passed in planning. They discussed who Maria would speak to first, which community members might support them, and how John could present himself honestly without angering those who feared him. Each detail was carefully considered, every risk weighed. There was no room for mistakes, but neither was there room for hesitation. By the time Maria left the jailhouse, the sun was high in the sky and the town was fully awake. She walked back to her community with a sense of purpose. Today the plan had begun, not with loud declarations or confrontation, but with conversation, trust, and the shared courage to face an uncertain future. John remained behind bars, his mind racing with possibilities and strategies. He understood the gravity of what lay ahead, but for the first time in years, he felt a sense of hope rather than fear. The hope was dangerous, yes, but it was also life-affirming. And for the first time, he believed that he might not have to face the world alone. That afternoon, the jailhouse was quiet, the desert stretching endlessly beyond its wooden walls. Inside, two people had made a choice, not just to survive, but to face the future together, with honesty, courage, and the willingness to take risks for the sake of trust and connection. The days ahead would test them both. But they had taken the first step towards something extraordinary, a chance at a new life, built on understanding, respect, and shared purpose. And so, the plan was set in motion, a daring step into the unknown that could either change their lives forever or test their courage in ways they had never imagined. But both Maria and John knew one truth. No matter the outcome, they had chosen bravery, honesty, and each other. The town was awake early that morning. Dust rose from the streets as people prepared for the day, unaware that history was about to be made behind the doors of the small jailhouse. The trial of John Callahan was set to begin, and the courthouse, a modest wooden building near the center of town, was already crowded with townsfolk, curious neighbors, and a few skeptical officials. The air was thick with tension, rumors, and the unspoken question: would the feared rancher be punished, or could he prove himself beyond his reputation? Maria approached the courthouse with steady steps, her heart beating with anticipation. She had spent the previous days speaking to community leaders, explaining her intentions and gently asking for support. Some had listened willingly, others skeptically, but all had noted her courage. She knew the plan was risky. If even one person opposed her, the trial could turn against John completely. Yet, she felt a quiet confidence. They had taken the first step together, and now they would face the challenge side by side. John followed shortly after, his broad shoulders squared, his expression calm but alert. He had not spoken much during the walk to the courthouse, choosing instead to focus on the plan they had devised. He understood that appearances were critical. His behavior, his words, and his demeanor would speak louder than any defense he could make in court. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose beyond survival. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was tense. The judge, a stern man with a weathered face, presided over the proceedings. Witnesses were called, testimony was given, and the room seemed to grow heavier with every passing moment. The townsfolk murmured among themselves, watching John closely, some with fear, others with curiosity. Maria stood near the front, her presence quiet but firm. She was ready to speak if the opportunity arose, ready to lend support with honesty and courage. As the trial progressed, it became clear that John's reputation alone was not enough to sway the court. The evidence was circumstantial, and the judge and jury listened carefully to every detail. But some witnesses spoke of John's past misdeeds, but others, influenced by Maria's words and the quiet support of her community, described instances where John had acted with honor, protecting those in need and standing up for fairness. The contrast between the man feared by the town and the man known to those who had witnessed his courage began to emerge. Maria remained silent for much of the trial, observing, listening, and waiting for the right moment. When her turn came to speak, she stepped forward calmly, her hands folded in front of her. She addressed the court and the townspeople with a voice that was firm yet gentle. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen," she began, "I speak not as someone who wishes to defend or excuse past actions, but as someone who has seen the true character of John Callahan. Yes, he has faced challenges and made mistakes, as we all have. But I have also seen courage, honesty, and a willingness to do what is right, even when it is difficult. He is not defined by fear, nor by the stories told in whispers. He is defined by his actions, by his choices, and by the potential to create a future of fairness and respect." Her words were simple, yet they carried weight. The townsfolk listened, some leaning forward, others exchanging quiet glances. She spoke of trust, of courage, and of the importance of seeing beyond reputation. When she finished, a silence settled over the room, a silence filled with reflection and consideration. John felt a shift within the courtroom. The tension that had gripped him since his arrest began to ease, replaced by a cautious hope. Maria's words had reached the hearts of those who had been skeptical, reminding them that a man's past did not have to define his future. Barris. When the judge called for the final statements, John stood. He spoke slowly, choosing each word carefully. "Your Honor, I do not deny my past. I have faced hardships and made choices I regret, but I have also learned. I have been shown the value of trust, honesty, and courage, not by force but by someone willing to see me as more than my reputation. I ask not for mercy alone, but for understanding. I ask that my actions, both past and present, be considered with fairness." The courtroom was silent again. Even those who had doubted him could not ignore the sincerity in his voice. He was not the man who needed to command fear to survive. He was a man asking to be understood, and that alone was a remarkable display of courage. The judge conferred briefly with the jury, their deliberations seeming to stretch longer than anyone expected. Maria stood quietly, her hands still folded, her eyes on John. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he held himself, but she also saw hope, a spark that had been absent for years. The town had watched, listened, and considered, not just the facts, but the character of the man before them. Great. Finally, the jury returned. The room seemed to hold its breath as the foreman stepped forward.
"We find John Callahan," he began, and for a moment time seemed to slow. "Not guilty of the charges as presented, based on evidence and character testimony, including the courage and honesty demonstrated during this trial."
A wave of relief and astonishment swept through the courtroom. John exhaled deeply, feeling the weight he had carried for months lift slightly. He looked at Maria, who smiled faintly but warmly. Their eyes met, and in that moment they understood that their partnership, their trust, and their courage had made a difference. As John left the courthouse free but aware of the challenges still ahead, Maria joined him outside. The sun was higher now, warming the streets and casting long shadows from the buildings. Townsfolk watched quietly as the man they had feared walked with a woman they had come to respect. There was curiosity, yes, but also a recognition of something deeper, a bond forged by courage and honesty. John turned to Maria, his expression serious but filled with gratitude.
"I owe you more than I can say," he admitted. "Your courage, your words, and your belief in me have changed the course of my life."
"I do not know what lies ahead, but I know that I do not want to face it alone." Maria placed a hand gently on his arm.
"And you will not have to," she said softly. "We have faced fear together, spoken honestly, and taken a risk.
Now we face the future together as well." The days that followed were not without challenges. Some townsfolk remained skeptical, and whispers of doubt lingered in corners and markets, but the foundation had been laid. Maria's influence, the respect of her community, and John's own conduct began to shift perceptions. People began to see him not as the feared rancher, but as a man capable of courage, honesty, and change. John and Maria worked together to bridge their worlds. She introduced him to the traditions and values of her community, while he shared his knowledge of the land, ranching, and survival. Together they found a balance, mutual respect, shared responsibility, and a growing bond that strengthened with every challenge. Evenings were spent around small fires, sharing stories of their pasts, dreams for the future, and quiet laughter. John learned to appreciate the strength in Maria's people, the depth of their connection to the land, and the way they cared for one another. Maria saw in John a side that few had witnessed, the man who could protect, who could care, and who could build trust in a world that had often relied on fear. In time, the marriage took place quietly, without fanfare, but with profound meaning for both of them. But it was not just a union of two people, but a union of trust, courage, and shared purpose. The ceremony was simple, witnessed by those who had supported them and by a few curious townsfolk, yet it marked the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter filled with hope, connection, and resilience. John and Maria faced life's challenges together. There were disagreements, misunderstandings, and moments of tension as in any life shared closely. But each challenge was met with honesty, respect, and a determination to face the world together, rather than alone. The bond they had built in the quiet moments of jailhouse conversations became the foundation for their life beyond it. Years later, people would still speak of John Callahan, the feared rancher, but they would also speak of the courage of the Apache woman who saw beyond fear and reputation, who believed in honesty, and who helped change a life through trust and partnership. Their story became one of hope, proving that courage and connection could transform even the harshest realities into something meaningful. Maria and John would often walk together along the desert plains, watching the sun rise and set, reflecting on the journey they had taken. They had faced fear, uncertainty, and danger, but they had also found something rare, a partnership built on trust, understanding, and shared courage. And in that partnership they discovered that even in the harshest of worlds, hope could thrive, and hearts could find their home. The story of Maria and John ended not with grand triumph or spectacle, but with the quiet victory of two people who chose honesty over fear, courage over isolation, and connection over solitude. In their world of dust, sun, and wind, they had found each other, and together they faced the future with unwavering strength.